The Industrial Revolution began in Britain, and Britain used to build the world. At its peak in the mid-19th century, this small island nation produced over half of the world's coal and manufactured goods, earning it the title Workshop of the World. Today, manufacturing accounts for just 8% of the UK economy. This is the story of the most dramatic industrial rise and fall in modern history. To understand how far Britain has fallen, you first have to understand how high it climbed. The Industrial Revolution, generally dated from 1760 to 1840, transformed Britain from an agrarian society into the world's first industrial superpower. But recent research suggests the roots go even deeper. Britain was already well on its way to industrialisation under the Stuart monarchs in the 1600s, over a century before the textbooks say it began. Agricultural peasantry was already in steep decline, replaced by networks of blacksmiths, shoemakers, weavers, and artisans producing goods at scale. Then came the inventions that changed everything. Abraham Darby's iron furnace in 1709, John Kay's Flying Shuttle in 1733, and from there an explosion of innovation in textiles, steam power and metallurgy that no other nation could match. Britain held two critical advantages: abundant coal and iron, the raw materials of industrialisation, and a commercial culture built by institutions like the East India Company, founded in 1600, that generated demand, production networks, and profit on a global scale. By the mid-19th century, British workers were the richest in Europe. The nation accounted for nearly a quarter of all global industrial production. British shipyards launched 60% of the world's tonnage. British steel forged the railways that connected continents, and British textiles clothed the world. But here's the thing about peaks: they're by definition followed by decline. The first warning signs appeared as early as 1851 at the Crystal Palace exhibition. British visitors were rattled by the quality and pricing of manufactured goods from continental Europe and the United States. The competition was coming, and it was coming fast. World War I accelerated the shift. Foreign markets that had depended on British goods began building their own factories, and the Golden Age started to unravel. By the 1920s, British shipbuilding's share of world tonnage had dropped from 60% to 50%, and it kept falling. Shipbuilding unemployment surged from 5% in 1920 to over 40% by 1929. In the first 9 months of 1930, only 1 in 5 British shipbuilders received any orders at all, but the real collapse came after 1979. When Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister, manufacturing already represented about 18% of GDP, down from over 20% at the start of the decade. What happened next remains one of the most contested episodes in British economic history. Between 1979 and 1983, over 2 million jobs in industry and 1.7 million in manufacturing simply vanished. The steel workforce, which had numbered over 300,000 in the early 1970s, was nearly halved to 167,000 by 1981. Tony Benn, the former industry secretary who had championed nationalisation as a shield for British workers, warned that this represented not just economic policy, but the deliberate dismantling of an industrial state. Then came the miners' strike, and to understand it, you have to understand that it didn't come out of nowhere. As far back as 1977, a confidential Conservative Party strategy document known as the Ridley Plan had mapped out precisely how a future Thatcher government would take on the unions, stockpiling coal, preparing non-union haulage, and choosing the ground for confrontation carefully. The miners were always the target. On March 6, 1984, the National Coal Board announced plans to close 20 pits, eliminating 20,000 jobs. Arthur Scargill, president of the National Union of Mine Workers, called a national strike 6 days later over the objections of the Trade Union Congress, which feared the timing and the terrain. The strike lasted almost exactly a year, and when it ended on March 3rd, 1985, it wasn't just a labour dispute that was over, it was an ERA. Mick McGahey, the union's vice president, put it bluntly: "We understood the Conservative government's determination to use the state machine against us. In order to dismember the welfare state, they had to break the trade union movement, and they needed to break the miners first." The defeat triggered the closure of most coal mines, the rapid privatization of nationalised industries, and the hollowing out of working-class communities across northern England, Wales and Scotland. The coal industry was privatised in 1994. Britain's last deep coal mine closed in December 2015. And in 2019, researchers at Sheffield Hallam University found that former coalfield areas, home to 5.7 million people, were still gripped by deprivation and poor health. While industry collapsed, finance rose. On October 27, 1986, the so-called Big Bang deregulated the City of London in one fell swoop. Electronic trading replaced face-to-face dealing. International banks flooded in, and London emerged as a financial capital to rival New York. Winston Churchill had once warned that he would rather see finance less proud and industry more content. John Maynard Keynes had cautioned that when the capital development of a country becomes a byproduct of the activities of a casino, the job is likely to be ill done. Their warnings went unheeded. Some historians argue this was inevitable. William Rubinstein contended that Britain was never fundamentally an industrial economy at all, that its comparative advantage always lay in commerce and finance. Others, including Michael Heseltine, who spent decades pushing for active industrial policy and regional investment, see it as a deliberate political choice with devastating human consequences. The car industry tells the story in miniature. British Leyland, formed in 1968, absorbed much of the British-owned motor vehicle industry and held a 40% share of the UK car market. It produced the Mini, the Jaguar E-Type, the Land Rover, and some of the most innovative automotive engineering in history happened in British factories. But mismanagement, underinvestment, and political interference strangled the company. It was part nationalised in 1975. Thatcher herself acknowledged that the economic consequences of letting it collapse were appalling, with 150,000 jobs at stake, but the slow death continued anyway. MG Rover, the final remnant, went bankrupt in 2005. British mass-market car production was finished. And yet, the story isn't entirely one of retreat. Nissan's decision to build its Sunderland plant in 1986 and Toyota's later investment in Derby showed that Britain could still attract world-class manufacturing, just not under British ownership. Today, the Sunderland plant is one of the most productive car factories in Europe. It's a complicated footnote, foreign capital doing what domestic industry could not sustain. And then came Brexit. The UK formally left the EU single market on January 1, 2021, and the impact on manufacturing has been significant. Exports to the EU fell by 23% between 2017 and 2024. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement reduced total UK goods exports by an estimated £27 billion in 2022. 14% of firms that had previously exported to the EU stopped altogether, and smaller manufacturers with fewer resources to navigate new trade barriers were hit hardest. Where does that leave Britain today? The numbers are sobering. Manufacturing's share of GDP has fallen from 30% in 1970 to roughly 8% in 2024. The UK is now the 11th largest manufacturing economy globally. In robotics adoption, a key indicator of manufacturing modernity, Britain lags far behind. Using just 71 robots, per 10,000 employees compared to 176 in the United States, 301 in Germany, and 531 in South Korea. 56% of manufacturers believe national productivity is in decline. The steel crisis grinds on. The blast furnaces at Port Talbot in South Wales, owned by Tata Steel, were losing around £1 million a day before closure, with about 3,000 jobs at risk. And Port Talbot is not alone. Scunthorpe, the last remaining integrated steelworks operating under the British Steel name, has faced its own cycle of crisis and uncertain ownership, a reminder that the steel geography of this country runs far deeper than any single plant. Closures at Redcar, Ravenscraig, Llanwern and Ebw Vale have left scars that still haven't healed. But there are glimmers. The manufacturing PMI for July 2026 reached 52.8, supported by the strongest growth in order books since February 2022, driven by demand from AI and defence sectors. One report suggests UK manufacturers could unlock hidden production capacity worth up to £129 billion in additional annual output without significant new investment. Whether that potential is realised depends on choices being made right now. The story of British industry is not simply a story of inevitable decline. It's a story of decisions, of trade-offs between finance and manufacturing, between short-term profit and long-term industrial capacity, between the City of London and the factory floors of Sheffield, Birmingham and Port Talbot. Britain did build the world. The question now is whether it remembers how.